All right, it's 4:30. This joint meeting of the Board of Directors of the Town of Carefree Utilities Community Facilities District and the Carefree Water Company will come to order. Please take a silent roll call. Agenda item number 1, approval of the September 5th, 2023 joint meeting of the Carefree Town Council, the Board of Directors of the Town of Carefree Utilities Community Facilities District, and the Carefree Water Company. Any questions or comments about those minutes? So hearing none, I would entertain a motion for approval.
I move that we approve the minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Agenda item number 2. Review, discussion, and possible action to accept the findings of the 2022-2023 fiscal year audit of the district by approval of Resolution 2024-01. Mr. Crossman.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, good evening and Happy New Year to everybody. Hope everybody had a good holiday season and welcome to 2024. Thank you for approving agenda item number 1. Agenda item number 2, up for your consideration, is the acceptance of the findings of our fiscal year 2022-2023 audit report. You would be doing that via approval of Resolution 2024-01. We do have with us tonight representatives from the audit firm who did our audit, both our audit of the UCFD and the town, which is Heinfield Meach. We have with us in the audience Jennifer Shields, who was in charge of the audit group, who did both the town and the UCFD audit. Thank you, Jennifer, for coming tonight. And then we also have with us, on my right, your left, Megan Orm, who represents the UCFD. She is the district treasurer. Megan is very instrumental in making sure that the auditors have all the information they need to complete their audit report. And I would like to thank both Jennifer and Megan for all of the work that they've done on the audit. It is a major effort, and it's a team effort between the UCFD and the auditing firm. And again, thank you for all of their efforts. The goals of this year's audit are exactly the same as the goals have been over the previous 12 years, or 11 years since I've been here. First, we want to make sure that we as the UCFD and the water company are observing good accounting practices and principles. We also want to make sure that we are in compliance with all GASB requirements, with GASB being the Government Accounting Standards Board. We want to make sure all of our financial documents are free from material misstatements, and the audit helps us guard against any kind of fraud or misuse of our customers and our public funds that we're entrusted with. The audit also allows us to provide you as the board transparency, but it also provides transparency to our customers and to all of the citizens of Carefree. And finally, the audit make sure that we can meet our debt obligations and our debt requirements. So I'm happy to report that all of these goals have been met for this year's audit. And as far as our audit results, and these are the results based on my interpretation and Megan's interpretation, I will open it up to Jennifer to make sure she gives you your her interpretation of the audit. But ours is that we have another clean audit this year. Our accounting practices and principles are in order. Our financial statements are free from any material misstatements, and we've been able to meet all of our debt obligations. So from my perspective and from Megan's perspective, the UCFD and the water company are both in very sound financial condition, which is very important because we've taken on another $18.5 million in debt in our Series 2021 revenue bonds. So it's very important that we're in sound financial condition. And in that regard, on our Series 2021 revenue bonds, This audit is important because part of our bond requirements are that we post this audit report by February 1st, so we're on schedule. If approved tonight, we will get that posted and meet our February 1st deadline. As far as the repayment of this $18.5 million worth of bonds, we've already made 3 interest during construction payments. Those have been completed. That is money that was included in our bonding effort. But I'm happy to report we've also started our formal repayment of the bond. We've made 2 bond payments up to this point, in addition to the interest during construction payments. Our first bond payment was made on July 1st of last year of 2023. Seems odd to say 2023 was last year, but it was. And our second bond payment was made yesterday on January 1st of 2024. So we're on our way to repaying this debt. So with that, kind of brief summary of our audit effort, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Jennifer to have her give you her take on our audit this year. Jennifer?
Very good. Mr. Chairman, members, Mr. Crossman, thank you for allowing me the time to speak with you tonight. As Mr. Crossman said, the audit opinion was in fact clean, so he is correct in that realm. And we did not have any audit findings that needed to be reported as well. So that's all very good news. Just in terms of required communications between audit firm and those charged with governance, some timeline of the audit. I know we're here a little bit later than we were in prior years to present the audit, but the timing of the actual procedures performed was consistent with prior years. We performed our field work during about the August timeframe. So once you close the fiscal year out for the year ended June 30th, then it takes a little bit of time for you guys to finish closing out and processing transactions. So August is actually a really early time frame for any organization with a June 30th year end. So that's good news there. And it speaks just to the readiness of the organization itself in terms of being ready to be audited. The actual financial statements were drafted after that and reviewed kind of off-site. We do some procedures where we draft the audit report and put those things together. And that was done during the month of August, and the reports were submitted to management for review. In October, correction. So in October, those drafts were sent to management for review, and then ultimately the report was dated and ready for issuance in December, right before the winter holidays. So all of that is good news. In terms of other required communications, I'm happy to report that we did not encounter any difficulties in performing our audit. We had no disagreements with management about accounting practices. There were no uncorrected misstatements that were required to report to you. And there is a letter that is addressed, I think it's actually addressed to the town council as part of the UCFD, but it encompasses both it encompasses the town, the UCFD, and the water company itself. And so all of those documents or all of those communications are in writing and presented for you as well. In terms of us being independent auditors, we are required to maintain our ethical requirements in accordance with our professional standards, and I'm happy to report that we were able to do that so that in fact your audit report was conducted by independent parties. And essentially that concludes my report. It's always short when there are no findings and it's a clean opinion. So with that, I am happy to stand for any questions that you may have of me.
All right, well, thank you very much. I know, in speaking to Greg, it's been a pleasure for the water company to be working with you and all your team members.
Thank you.
So thank you for that.
Thanks. I know the rest of our team has enjoyed their time as well. They're very, very helpful and able to provide the information and get us timely answers to our questions, which makes everybody's life a little bit easier.
Yeah,
So thank
exactly.
you.
Is there any comments or questions from the council?
No, we're good.
I-
Thank you.
Are we, so the packet that we just reviewed, is this completed, or is there anything else that's going to be covered on this unless we have additional questions, or Greg?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the packet is complete. It is ready to be acted on and accepted unless there are any changes that the board wants to vote on.
Okay, so I do have a question. On page 14 of the packet, you talk about, assuming you authored this packet primarily, is this?
Now, this was actually authored by the auditor.
The auditor.
Minefield Meach, so.
Okay, so,
It might be a question that Jennifer needs to answer.
okay, so Jennifer, it was mentioned that in 2023, there were net revenues of 1.4 million that basically came about through the additional accounts acquired as a result of this, of the water changeover on the west side of town. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so assuming then that that will be happening over the next 30 years, that's additional revenue that is coming in toward paying for this project, correct?
Yes, I believe that is correct.
Okay, so in my math, in my calculations, 30 years times 1.4 million is $42 million. And the total cost of this project, including the 4% interest calculated, is about 31.4. Does that sound about right?
Yes.
So what am I missing? Why was this wrong? Why was this project in this why did we receive so much criticism for doing this? I'm trying to understand
Mr.
because we are either whole at $1 million a year in revenue or 1.4 million. We're at 42 million, which puts us $11 million over what the actual project cost, which includes the interest and doesn't include any future increases to the ratepayers.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, do remember that that is an increase in revenues, but there also is an increase in expenditures related to new customers. We have to purchase water, we have to purchase services, so it's not a net. That
Okay.
is not money, all that money we cannot use to repay the bond.
Okay, so
Only
of that,
a portion of that money
right.
can be used to repay the
So
bond.
of that 1.4 million, how much would you estimate is going toward maintenance and other factors, other costs? 20%,
Mr.
30%?
Chairman, members of the board, Board Member Amoroso, I think we did a back-of-the-envelope calculation of that, and I can't remember.
Yeah, well, it changes year over year. So for probably, I have to see if I can remember back. For the next couple years, I think we're well ahead, but then we even it out to kind of like a baseline of just essentially, you know, the new revenues and expenses do contribute to the overall budget, but that gap shrinks.
Okay, so,
I don't have the numbers off the top of my head.
okay. So are we potentially talking a couple $1 million less than what we're actually pulling in revenue? I mean, a couple of $100,000 a year? I mean, because that's a big spread from, 1.4 million in additional revenue that we're pulling in that we didn't have before as a result of this changeover, whereas there was a lot of criticism thrown around saying, well, you're spending $31 million, why are you doing that? But yet 1.4 million last year alone in additional revenue, new revenue. So
Yeah,
half that?
So
I mean,
the-
what's this costing us?
we are just as Greg mentioned, we're just starting to pay the full principal and interest on the bonds this year. So, the 1.4 million, we had a reduced level of debt service because we were using the funded interest that we came when we issued the debt. So, over time, as I said, the gap of that 1.4 million, because we have 2 times debt service coverage there, that's
Right.
not gonna always be the case.
Right.
But that's just because over time, that will shrink, that gap will shrink down, and like I said, it's just gonna all merge out to, revenues and expenses and.
Okay, so including potential increases, which, again, like death and taxes, things go up in cost over time, this pays for itself.
Well, it does pay for itself in the sense that, we are taking in new revenues and we are, factoring into consideration the cost of water, which is our biggest cost. But, so what you're saying is that, I'm trying to understand what you're saying. What you're saying.
What I'm saying is, this program ultimately paid for itself and then some, in that we are going to
Yeah, I
be
don't
made
think-
whole on this investment over
Well-
time.
Well, we're gonna be able to pay for it over time. It will be made whole. That's not the problem. But that is giving you a false sense of coverage because we had reduced interest. Our interest every year, principal and interest when due, I think ranges from 1.1 million to 1 to 1.1 million, something like that.
Right.
I don't have it in front of me. And so that's what our principal and interest when due will be. So that coverage right now, which is at 2 times, is gonna drop down. I don't know exactly what it's gonna be. It's gonna be at least 1.2 times, cause that's our coverage
Okay.
ratio required. But, yeah, I don't know.
Right.
And then I think it gets hard to determine exactly out, 5 years from now, how much water do the new customers use versus the old customers and things like that, and what is the
Right.
price of water, and what's gonna happen in 2026 with cap water
Understood.
prices.
I think,
I don't-
yeah, and
it's
I
hard to
apologize
say.
for cutting you off. I think the main point is that when there's criticism thrown around over the cost of this project, I think it's important to also include the fact that there's additional revenue being drawn
We did.
as a result of this transaction that people need to understand.
We did talk about that, and
Okay.
I had made a mistake in my original calculation without taking into consideration the total cost of water. I just was taking into consideration the cap water costs and not the Scottsdale added costs. So, but this year, the 1.4 million is well over what is due because we have not started paying the full principal and interest, because we had what's called the funded interest in my world, and we called it
So in your opinion, Greg, do you feel over time that the additional revenue drawn will average at least $1 million a year in additional revenue?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board,
expected.
additional revenue compared to if we did not acquire these properties, definitely. It's
Okay.
only gonna go up with time and with rate increases. A substantial part of that $1.4 million is expenditures. How much exactly, I can't tell you. I would say at least 50% of that is gonna be additional expenditures. But there is additional revenue coming in that we can use to pay off that bond effort. And that was all factored into the financial analysis that was done by Wildan. And so we're right on schedule as far as the money coming in.
Sure.
And then for paying for this effort.
So in layman's terms, this paid for itself.
No, not really.
Vince, hold on.
Yeah, it's too hard to say, it's too hard to make that,
What, not $1 million a year in revenue to be applied toward
because
a
we're not-
$31 million debt?
we're not taking
including,
into consideration the expenditures, expenses of adding $1
Right, and
million.
we're also
We have
not-
to buy the water.
but we're also not taking into consideration any rate increases to the ratepayers.
But we still have to pay for the water, and the water
Right.
is the largest cost of the entire system.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that $1 million in revenues, that's not the net revenues. The net revenues will be after expenses, which the primary, once again, cost will be water. So that's not to say that it'll pay for itself over 30 years it's not true, but it was also be very difficult, in 5 or 10 years, because we increased our subscription base by 25%. So any expenditures we have down the road for infrastructure will be covered by more people, which is good because that lowers the cost for everybody. But we are still a very small utility. It's still a very small utility. So it's not just because that 1.4 million, stop looking at that. That is not.
No, and I'm not,
Yeah.
I'm estimating down to 1.
Well,
I mean, that's 40%
it could be. I mean,
less,
it could be.
Potentially, right?
It could be.
okay?
It just depends on how much water we use, starting in 2027. I guess is probably one of the big issues.
Point being, again, is that it's important to account for the fact that there is additional revenue, whether it's 200,000, 300,000, 700,000, 1.4 million, whatever it is, that has to be in the conversation when we're talking about what the cost of this overall project was. When people are floating around numbers that are either bold-faced lies of over $40 million, which the math right here says it's 31.4, including the interest, that has to be considered. So,
If
Okay.
I may,
That is correct.
all right.
Sheila, the cost of the bond doesn't ever change.
Right.
Okay? That's a
No.
fixed
Correct.
dollar amount of 31.4 that you mentioned. Any number above that in the calculation was to offset the additional future cost of water, maintenance, and so forth. That was embedded in the calculation. So that's how you would separate those two numbers. The 31 is for the cost of the
Ongoing.
project.
Right.
The other 10 million was the cost of funding all the maintenance and the water and all that over that time frame. And Sheila was right. Originally, we collected a little bit more than we needed. Then it kind of went flat for a while. And then we actually draw down actually a little bit less than we need. But in the bigger picture, when you do the numbers, it comes out to that number. I remember looking at that. So just remember, it's in two parts. The bond is always the same, never changes.
Right.
That's being funded by the interest expense and so forth. But the balance of it is all those future costs that are embedded that we have to address. So that's where that number comes from. That's why it looks a little distorted. But it's really not. It's from the inflation and buying the water and et cetera, so.
But the.
There's no extra money per se
Yeah.
running
But
around
no,
to
but-
do stuff. That's not it at all.
Right, right. But as a result of all this, there is additional revenue from
Yes.
the new accounts acquired.
Oh, the whole,
That is a
that
true
whole
statement.
aspect is
Okay.
fully funded, fully,
Sure.
you know, comes into calculation. So there's no shortage there at all through the whole 30-year deal.
Okay.
It's self-funding. Anyway, that's how I looked at it. But I think that's just separate the two, the bond and all the future costs that has to be considered in present value of it. So, does that help, I hope?
So we have about 7 minutes left, and I have one question. Maybe this is best for Greg. On page 11, it talks, the auditors bring up some ideas about suggested policies for managing risk and credit risk and maybe custodial credit risk is what they call it, bank risk. So can you comment to that? I mean, they're suggesting some policies there. I'm not sure we really need to do them, but what do you think?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, we have an unwritten policy to have all of our deposits and all of our money resides in financial institutions to have it somehow insured, whether it's by the state pool, which is a state collateral pool, or whether it's under the FDIC program. And so we've managed our funds and our accounts in that way to have a majority, if not all, of our deposits in banks collateralized, if you will, or insured. And so by kind of unwritten administrative policy that Megan looks at continually, we try and have all of our account balances collateralized or insured. Whether we need to formalize that or not, I don't know if we really need to. It's really good financial practice what we're doing and what we're implementing now. I don't know if Jennifer, if you wanted to speak to policies as far as insurance,
Sure, it's,
collateralization.
sure, thank you, Mr. Crossman, and Mr. Chairman, members of, it's not uncommon, so in that particular disclosure, there is, what Mr. Crossman is saying is correct. The water company does have multiple financial institutions in which funds are on deposit so that those are FDIC insured, meaning that in the event of a bank failure, your deposits are protected against loss. It is not uncommon for agencies of all sizes to, from short periods of time or even longer periods of time, to have certain balances that are uninsured and uncollateralized. From the accounting standpoint, it's required that we disclose what the dollar value of that is so that potential investors would know how much of your cash and investment portfolio is subject to risk. So in your case, you could do some math. I can't do it in my head, so I apologize, but you can do the math on the total cash and investments that are held by the water company and UCFD, and you can then compare that to the amount that's uninsured and uncollateralized. You also have management decisions to make because keeping your money in multiple financial institutions also results in costs. So trying to balance out the cost of, having your cash in multiple financial institutions in terms of banking fees and all the like, versus the risk that you're, subjecting yourself to by having uninsured amounts for periods of time is a management decision. And then further, if you were to invest in things that were not insured, that's where having a credit risk policy or a more formalized investment policy would come into place. But that's, like Mr. Crossman said, right now, currently, the cash is really in financial institutions and with the state treasurer's pool, which is also collateralized. It's just not collateralized directly in the name of the organization. It's held by the state. So there are essentially some management decisions that you would have to, evaluate as to whether or not you wanted to implement any different policies. This is fairly routine, in my opinion.
Okay, good, so it's nothing we should be worried about. That's what I'm,
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe so. All of our money is in low-risk bank deposits. What's uninsured, again, what is pointed out in this note is about $260,000 is a very low percentage of our overall funds. And it is a snapshot in time. Remember, it's what was uncollateralized, uninsured on June 30th of 2023. That those monies were in our operating account, and we're sitting there because we needed to pay essentially bills, and the checks had not been cashed yet. You could have looked at it 1 week later, and that money was not there because it was used to pay bills.
okay.
And so really our risk is really fairly minimal as far as any deposits that are over $250,000.
Okay, good. Well, I understand that. That's good. Thank you.
Thank
Any other
you.
questions or comments? I know, but we gotta.
With respect to credit risk, I think what they're referencing, at least part of that, is credit risk of the city to service the debt, not necessarily the current cash and investments that you have. That certainly they're good to have as a backup, but I think that's the question here is the town viable 30 years from now for potential risk from a credit standpoint? And because of the way that Greg has managed the resources of the water company, and Gary with the town funds, their ability to service that debt is we're in pretty good standing. But I think there's two parts to that discussion.
Well,
And I think we're
just
fine
to
on both.
be clear, the town is not liable for this debt.
Right.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Okay, so what I would like us to do is consider Resolution 2024-01. I would entertain a motion. A resolution of the Board of Directors of the Town of Carefree, Arizona Utilities Community Facilities District, accepting the findings of the fiscal year 2022-2023 annual audit for the district for the year ending June 30th, 2023. I have a motion.
Yeah, I'll make the motion to accept, the resolution of the Board of Directors of the Town of Carefree, Arizona Utilities Community Facilities District, to accept the findings for the fiscal year 2022-2023 annual audit.
Your second.
Second.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Item number 3, adjournment. Have a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The meeting's adjourned. And in about a minute, we'll have a town council meeting.